we're gonna start taking a deep dive into how we're roasting coffee. Welcome back to Coffee with April. This time we're gonna introduce a new concept. We're gonna start taking a deep dive into how we're roasting coffee, which basically showing details, profiles, and ideas behind what we do here in the April roastery. Now behind me, you see a 15 kilo Loring Smart Roast. That's what we do all of our roasting on. And just about a week ago, we were introduced to a new pretty fun project by our friends Coffee Circle in Berlin that we've been following basically for many years now. They basically called us up and they asked, do you guys want to roast 3 of our coffees? These 3 coffees were really interesting Brazilian coffees, 2 of them being what is referred to as masterpiece lots from the Terra, which is pretty well known as a coffee farm. We jumped on the opportunities. It's always fun to try new coffees. So what we want to do with this video is to walk you through what was our process. How did we go about profiling, roasting, evaluating these 3 coffees that later on this week or the week after is going to be available to purchase directly from Coffee Circle. Now, keep in mind, this is not necessarily an advertising for those coffees. It's more us thinking it's fun to actually share some insights in how we're roasting. And we're going to continue to do this as well. So we want you guys to please share if you have any questions or any specific things you want us to feature. Now, back to the coffees. So we got 3 very different coffees, different in varietals, different in processing. Step 1 with any coffee when it comes to profiling is to try to understand what has happened on a farm level. We're talking terroir, we're talking growing altitudes, we're talking varietals, and we're talking perhaps the most important part, which is processing and drying, right? So we're talking dry mill and wet mill. This is extremely important and decides how the coffee quality will be after roasting, and also to many factors actually decides how we're ending up roasting this coffee. Now, when the coffee comes in, the first thing we do is to sample roast it, mostly using a Kawa sample roaster. We cup that coffee to get an initial idea about the taste. After that, it's time for us to evaluate the green coffee in itself. This means looking closer at density, moisture, and water activity. Now, we always argue that this is something that you want to get in terms of information from your producers as well, because you want to work with producers that has these numbers. But it's always beneficial to cross-reference that once it arrived. Now, keep in mind that especially when it comes to water activity and moisture level, these are all very top specialty coffee graded coffees, which means that these numbers are going to be very, very similar, right? More about that in a later video. Now, what might differ, and especially coming to Brazil, is the densities in the coffees, which we use to then basically apply energy differently in the different roast curves that we apply to these coffees. Now, after we get a basic understanding for the green coffee, it's time to actually roast. To make things easier for us and to ensure a better result every single time, we here at April roasted 1 single batch ice. This gives us a lot more control over the different coffees and allows us to find a better profile much, much faster. Now, this case was pretty special as these are not green coffee sourced by April. These are sourced by Coffee Circle. We had a limited amount of trials and it was basically go from batch number 1. So in this case, we needed to cup the coffees, measure the coffees as we went to make sure that these profiles are as good as possible, right? So a key thing here is not just finding the initial roasting curve, but also have a process for identifying, am I on the right track? And numbers is amazing, and we're really happy to work with programs like Cropster, for example. But in the end of the day, it's about the taste in the cup. So it's about tasting what are we doing, and with that, actually tweaking the coffee, right? So that's part of what is really interesting in this process. To make this easier for us, we focus a lot on, as we said before, 1 batch ice, but also, most importantly, 1 batch ice allows us that with a specific and consistent in-between protocol to make sure that we have the same initial temperature in the machine for every single batch. This gives us a lot more control when we're roasting and gives you guys a much, much better result. Okay, so we're looking at 3 different coffees here. We're looking at 2 experimental processing and 1 basically natural processed coffees. And what we've done here is that we approach them similar in terms of duration of roast. So the total roast time is basically within 6 to 7 seconds on each single profile. What we've done as well is that we're locked in some kind of initial idea about what is the time after crack, which in this case on all the coffees are ranging between 1 minute to 106 on the highest and 1 minute on the shortest, which is just to kind of ensure that we have enough transparency in all coffees. Then slightly depending on green coffee quality and also depending on how much vibrancy and what kind of concept that we're looking for each coffee, we have regulated a slightly different end temperature, which is also going to have an effect on the final color of the coffee as well, right? So that's something we consider in terms of how transparent and how acidic do we want this kind of coffee to be. When I say acidity, I refer to more as vibrancy and cleanliness in the coffee, right? We by no means want the coffees to be sour, but we do want them to be really vibrant and juicy. So 2 of the profiles were basically pushed the highest amount of burner in the initial part of the roast, and 1 of the profiles we basically started on a quite lower temperature and we build up the temperature as we went. And this is a method or approach often referred to as soaking the coffee, which is traditionally done in a different kind of roast system, but here on the lowering, what it does, it just helps us control the kind of initial heat transfer in the roast, which is really interesting. So the general argument is that the initial part of the roast is going to have a bigger impact on the inner color of the bean, and the later part of the roast will have a bigger impact on the outer color of the bean, which is a truth with moderation, but it's definitely going to be generating a coffee that has a slightly lighter touch on the palate, which we tend to enjoy, especially in this case. Now, after roasting these coffees, or continuous in this case, we're color tracking the coffee. This time using a Lightel color tracking machine. There's a bunch of different machines on the market. In the end, they all measure slightly different, and we argue that the measurement in itself is not the point. What makes the most sense is that measurement is a reference point for you as a roastery. Keep in mind that details like grind size makes a huge difference in terms of what numbers that machine actually will tell you. Same as, for example, when after roast did you do it, so how many days afterwards. So there's some factors to definitely look into there, but just keep in mind that in the end of the day, tasting is everything, right? So when it comes down to cupping your coffee or in whatever way you evaluate it, make sure that extraction is perfect. Don't forget that cupping is actually brewing, right? You need to control all of those variables because that's how you evaluate your final roast result. Now, the point with this video is just kind of give you a generalized view on how we'll work with these 3 different coffees. If you want to taste them, which I think you should, I'm sure Coffee Circle has them available at some point on their website, so just visit them there and see if you can find it. Now, we want your advice, your thoughts on what's coming up next, right? What do you want to see in terms of how April roast? Don't ask for declining rate of rise because that's not what we're doing here. But if you have any other questions, we're more than happy to actually answer them. So thank you guys for watching. Any questions, as always, just comment them down below. Have a good day.